We have spent the past 5 weeks in John's 6th chapter. I often hear people remark how summer has just flown by, but if you've been coming to church for all these 5 weeks, I don't think summer has flown by. It's been a slog through John's 6th chapter. It all started outside. We had that fun ecumenical service by the lake with hundreds of people where Jesus fed the 5,000. But then after this miracle, Jesus starts teaching and talking. He explains how he has been sent from heaven. He describes himself as the bread of life. He talks about eating flesh and drinking blood. And it's a doozy. And John's telling all of this happens just the next day after the feeding of the 5,000. So the change in fun and fandom must have been very extreme. Because one day there are 5,000 people crowding around Jesus asking for more. And then the next day, very few are with him. Many are turning back and no longer going with him. It's a snapshot of the decline of the mainline Protestant church in America. A few weeks ago, I saw some figures that were measuring the decline of once big churches in the United Church of Christ. That is the denomination that our church is a part of, the United Church of Christ. I saw that a church, Central Union UCC in Hawaii, 20 years ago, weekly attendance was 1,200 people. And today, weekly attendance is 245 people. Asylum Hill UCC in Connecticut, 20 years ago, averaged 900 a week. These days, it's 90 a week. Plymouth UCC in Seattle was at 500 20 years ago, and now it's at 40 people. This didn't even keep track or measure or account for all the churches that have closed in that time. Like our sister congregation, Mitzvah UCC in Hopkins. It doesn't account for how close we may have been to closing, or how close we always are to closing. All of this is very fragile. It can change in decades, or years, or months, or even days. One day there are 5,000 people worshiping at the Church of Jesus, and the next day, there's just 12 people worshiping at the Church of Jesus. And after everybody else leaves today, Jesus asks the disciples the saddest question. Do you also wish to go away? Jesus must have been expecting a woeful nod in response to this question, sort of like when you ask someone, are you breaking up with me? Why would anyone want to stay if everyone else is leaving? At this point, the Church of Jesus would not have had much for resources. There wouldn't have been a great big valuable property that the few remaining members could have held on to. There would have been no heirlooms or beautiful rooms or spaces that the remaining few people could have held on to and hoarded for themselves. This is the fun thing about being one of the last people somewhere. A whole space belongs to you. You don't need to share it with anyone. This is why I get so happy when September rolls around and there are school buses going up and down the street. And every day at 8 a.m., my house becomes the most quiet and orderly place. It's all mine, just me and my wife clicking on our keyboards. If everyone else is leaving, you should probably leave too. Otherwise, you'll look foolish. So I wonder, in this story, everyone who leaves Jesus, where do they go? You got to go somewhere. Some of them probably went back home. And as she walked through the front door, her husband, on the couch, greeted her. "You're back already," he said. So the church thing didn't work out. He thought it was silly of her to be so hopeful and dedicated. She'd been aspirational like this before, like when she married him. But that hadn't worked out so well either. "I told you," the armchair philosopher went on, "I told you that church couldn't keep it up. You can't have a big party like that feeding 5,000 people one day and then the next day expect to hold their attention. People are always just looking for the next shiny, bright, new thing." He said this sitting on the couch as he looked at his shiny, bright, new smartphone and searched recipes for all the things you can do with a cucumber. She didn't need to be scolded like this. What she needed was a place that she could go to once a week to hear something that she could not believe, that she could be loved. Maybe some of the people who left the Church of Jesus went back to work because following Jesus had really cut into their productivity. They'd found themselves spending long mornings with this man, sitting outside, pondering things, learning new songs, being moved, but they would leave and find that they had nothing to show for all the time that they'd spent with him. So they figured that if things ever really got tight in life, this would be the one thing that they could get rid of. So that day, as he was leaving the Church of Jesus, one man sent a note off to his boss and said simply, "I'm back. I can take on that project that you talked to me about." And the man dove right into that extra project at work. It's funny it's called work because sometimes when you do something for 60 or 70 hours a week, it doesn't even really feel like work. It's just a reflex. It's what you know how to do best. More work, more work, more work. Some people who left the Church of Jesus probably went searching for other teachers or religious communities. Maybe these people had enough resources and wisdom to know that attending to one's spiritual needs was as important as visiting the dentist twice a year to get your teeth cleaned. So they set out to take care of this need with the same level of orderliness with which they'd applied to university or found a job or bought a house. I'm looking for something that is well-regarded, comfortable, something that will set me up for the next chapter in my life. And that was the problem with this Jesus character. He didn't care a whole lot about riches or success. Many of the things he said were uncomfortable. And you can find communities of people who care about riches and earthly success. They are called civilizations. Sometimes they're called churches. And those who left Jesus surely found some other churches that they could attend and where everything was so tidy that you could go and then forget about everything you'd done while you were there. Some of those who left probably walked away and never even knew what they were walking away from. When I was in college, we had a concert on campus one Saturday. It was some musician from the Midwest. The story went that he had recorded this whole album in a cabin in the woods in Wisconsin. The concert took place during an all-day college festival, and everyone had been drinking. People filled up the concert hall, and this man stood on stage, and he sang in a tender falsetto voice. And the drunks who were there pounded their feet on the ground and yelled at him to crank it up. We didn't think much of the concert. We just listened and left. We weren't overwhelmed by it. We went on with our lives. But then 5 years later, we heard that this guy won a Grammy. And we thought, a Grammy? Well, maybe some of the people who walked away from Jesus after Jesus died a few years later and got really famous said, well, we saw him a couple of years ago, but he never did anything like that. So everybody is leaving today. And we can only imagine what their motivations are for leaving. That's the wonder of the Bible. All the things that are left unsaid are open for us to insert our own lives and questions and insecurities. So why do people leave Jesus? Why do people leave the church? Who knows? But I think we can all imagine ourselves or one another not here. And facing this most intimidating movement, today, Peter offers the most wonderful response. Jesus says to him, "Do you also wish to go away?" And Peter says, "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life." Surely Peter has considered the alternatives. He's stayed home or worked a lot or sought out other religious communities where the small answers make too much sense out of great big life. And of course, it is Jesus' senselessness that has caused this morning's problem. There is the miracle he performs, and miracles are impossible. There is the discussion of eating flesh and drinking blood, which is disgusting. And then there is the promise that Jesus gives, where he says, "The words that I have spoken to you are spirit and life." Can words be spirit and life? Peter knows that they can. And so he says, "You have the words of eternal life." And I think that all of us know what the words of eternal life sound like because we know what they don't sound like. They don't sound like all the things that we are hearing and doing and pursuing out there that leave us empty in here. The words of eternal life never leave you hungry or thirsty. The words of eternal life give you breath. The words of eternal life endure as you appear before this baptismal font, helpless and unknowing, as you sit still later in life, focused and still growing, as life fades away like a breeze blowing. The words of eternal life are in this place. In this place? With one another? With God? Our text today ends with the writer of John's Gospel saying rather offhandedly that Jesus proclaimed all these things while he was teaching in a synagogue, a place of worship, a church, and then everyone leaves. And we know what it's like to leave a church. But even more than that, we know what it's like to find the words of eternal life in a church. Or as the poet Philip Larkin puts it, a serious house on serious earth this is, in whose blent air all our compulsions meet, are recognized and robed as destinies. And that much can never be obsolete, since someone will always be surprising, a hunger in themselves to be more serious and gravitate with it to this ground. So, alleluia, alleluia, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life.